Pick back up in the book reading, The Pope, Chief of White Slavers, High Priest of Intrigue by Jeremiah Crowley. We are in part 6 of the letter to the public. The papacy is certainly the enemy of the free press. That enmity began not yesterday, but started with the art of printing. See, for example, Leo X in the Council of Latran, Session 10, regarding the printing of books. Quote, lest that which has been wholesomely invented unto the glory of God, and the increase of the faith, and the propagation of the liberal arts, be converted to the contrary effect, and bring forth determinate to the salvation of the faithful of Christ. We deemed it right that our solicitude should be exercised concerning the printing of books, lest in future thorns grow up along with the good seed, or poisons be mixed up with medicines, wishing therefore to provide an opportune remedy for these with the approbation of this sacred council, that the business of the printing of such books may succeed with the greater prosperity in proportion as a more close search shall be employed with greater diligence and caution. We decree and ordain that henceforth, in the time to come, no one shall presume to print or cause to be printed any book or any writing soever, as well in our city as in all other cities and dioceses soever, unless such books or writings be first carefully examined in the city by our vicar and the master of the sacred palace, but in other states and dioceses by the bishop or some other person to be deputed for that purpose by the same bishop, and by the inquisitor of heretical depravity in the state or diocese in which the printing of such books may take place, and be approved by their subscription with their own hand, to be affixed in all cases, lest by taking an easy shortcut a heavy loss be sustained, as an inscription ought legitimately to precede an accusation. So also ought a charitable admonition to precede a denunciation, and a clamorous insinuation, and I'm so sorry, but they got me tongue twisted here. So also a charitable admonition to precede a denunciation, and a clamorous insinuation and inquisition. Such check being always employed, that according to the form of the trial, the form of the sentence also to be worded. Buckley, page 313, unquote. No man connected with the press is free from interference by the Catholic prelacy. He is, if a Catholic, informed that his duty on the secular press is to cover and conceal all misdeeds of bishops and priests. He is, if editor of a Catholic so-called paper published by the bishop's approval, obliged to write constantly or to receive and publish writings belauding the worst of bishops and the lewdest of clerics. Catholic papers are maintained by episcopal authority solely. These papers are either owned by the bishops themselves or depend for circulation on the approval of bishops. One of the papers standing best in the episcopal estimation is the Western Watchman, edited by that unclean priest, D.S. Filon, of whom the St. Louis Globe Democrat, August 20th, 1892, published the following editorial, to which Filon never dared make reply. The ribald cleric who, for some inscrutable purpose, as Mr. Greeley once remarked, is permitted to edit a weekly religious newspaper in this city called the Western Watchman, takes me for a topic in answer to some editorial remarks in the Globe Democrat on his criticism of the life and death of the late Judge Normile. I seem to have stirred him to his innermost depths in a very short paragraph, calling attention to the brutal and unprovoked character of his assault upon the memory of a man who, whatever his faults, and they were many, deserved something better than the maledictions of a renegade priest at his death. Noble spirits war not with the dead, says an old aphorism, but the ignoble spirit of Philon is proof against all saying, old and new, that are on the side of decency, humanity, and charity. His whole article, insofar as it attempts to be a statement of fact, is a tissue of falsehood. He says my arraignment of him was based on his criticism of the sin in Normile. He lies. What I reprobated in his infamous fulmination was that he took scarcely any notice of the supreme sin of suicide and spent all his curses upon the offense of Normile in changing his belief on his way from the cradle to the grave, as I phrased it. Suicide is never justified, and least of all in a case like that of Normile, which it was an unmanly surrender of one who was neither pursued nor besieged by a troublesome foe. But there was nothing in the life or death of Normile which justified his damnation in cold type. Still less was there anything in the life or character of Philon which justified in damning of anyone. The article bore the evidence of a malicious personal spite all the way through. It was, on Philon's part, a gross abuse of his office as a priest, although he may claim that it was the editor and not the priest who did the base work. One of these days the devil will get the editor, and then where will the priest be? A cause is no better than its advocate, and to estimate correctly the righteousness of the watchman's maledictions, it cannot be unfair to investigate the character and reputation of the man who uttered them. The pen of Chase Dickens painted the prototype of Philon many years ago when it wrote the immortal Pickwick Papers and gave to the world the Reverend Mr. Stingens, who, for reasons kept entirely to himself, was known as the Gentle Shepherd. Mr. Stingens had all the vices which Philon has, and which a clergyman should not have, including hypocrisy and bibulosity. He cultivated the latter weakness to such an extent that, a thing popped up on my thing. I hate that. Let's see. He cultivated the latter weakness to such an extent that the elder Mr. Weller says of him that when he made a pastoral call on the family, he always brought a 1.5-pint bottle with him, which he filled with pineapple rum. And that when he got through with that bottle, there was nothing left in it but the cork and the smell. The parable between Stingens and Philon is perfect in many respects, and it is hard to believe that Dickens, in creating Stingens, did not foresee Philon. The chief physical characteristics of Stingens was a red nose. Philon has a nasal capacity 100 candle power greater than that given by Shakespeare to Bardolph. How funny. It is a cartilaginous temperance lecture, which he who runs may read. It was acquired by sponging at the sideboards of the impertinent rich, while its owner was using his sacred office to denounce the small sins of the improvident poor. Then there is also already remarked the parallel of hypocrisy between the two. But Stingens was a much more manly hypocrite than Philon, in whom it is difficult to determine whether the liar or the hypocrite predominates, and who fails to add theft to his other accomplishments only because he lacks courage of his convictions. Mr. Philon complains that in a former article I did nothing but call names, which is not argument. In this writing, I am trying to do a little portrait painting, in the execution of which I trust a small amount of clumsiness will be excused for a great deal of truthfulness. In learning and literature, Philon is a pretentious ass and impostor. He is a fool among scholars and a scholar among fools. He has contrived to pick up a little knowledge between his drunks, as it is fast disappearing under the fumes of alcohol, which have already rendered it nebulous and uncertain. He has not read a book in 20 years, but has lived during that period in a state of intellectual hibernation, drawing a sustenance from the scanty acquirements of his youth, like a bear in winter quarters sucking his paws to live on the flesh acquired during the summer. He is fond of quoting Latin, but rarely ventures beyond the familiar phrases of that language to be found at the butt end of a Webster dictionary. In his intellectual process, he often mistakes delirium tremens for a divine inflatus and thinks he is inspired when he is only tipsy. In his judgment of the product of other minds, he is like Cassio, nothing if not critical, but the standard of criticism which he applies to others would, if applied to him, make an indecent exposure of his rum-drenched brain, even to the ignorant few who still believe him to be a scholar because he is an ecclesiastic. Thus, he can find nothing more pungent to say of the few editorial lines that provoked from him a column of maudlin malevolence than that they exhibit a want of continuity of thought. In his salad days, he heard the schoolmen say that continuity of thought was an essential of good English composition, and finding that small remnant of his education still in the lumber room of his memory, he brings it out, brushing the dust from it, and flourishes it as something new and hitherto unrevealed. He answered a quotation from Hamlet in which Ophelia, as you can tell, I've never read Shakespeare, in which Ophelia rebukes and puffed and reckless libertine who shows her the steep and thorny way to heaven by saying that Ophelia was crazy when she made the speech. Shade of the mighty William, did you craze Ophelia on the threshold of play in the very first act? Then we are told that the ungracious pastors whom Ophelia rebuked were 16th century performers. Here we have the ignorance of the watchman's ecclesiastical sot exposed again, though under the disguise of a jest. The scenes in Hamlet, according to the best commentators, were laid at least 5 centuries before the advent of the 16th century performers. Ophelia had in her mind's eye the felons of her time. Since its earliest day, the church has always had its felon, just as the vine has its louse and the rose its scarbones. Shakespeare drew from types of men and not from individuals. The 16th century performers doubtless had their felons, but as reformers, they were not sufficiently developed to be adequate to the purpose of the great master, who in his matchless creations looked before and after and was not for a day but for all time, who drew the Shylocks of today in the Merchant of Venice, just as he drew the felons of today in Hamlet. In his original article of August 14th, the Reverend Philon dwells especially on sins of the flesh as calculated to drive from the sane the Spirit of God. How much of the Spirit of God, then, can there be left in the soul of man, and that man a priest, who indecently addresses a virtuous woman on the street? Where you going, baby? Is this spoken by a man to a woman he had never seen before? The language of the flesh, or the exhalation from the spirit. For this language, with the conduct accompanying it, which suited the action to the word and the word to the action, D.S. Philon, wearing the garb of his holy office, was marched to the station house not long ago by a policeman at the instigation of the woman he had insulted. Two strongly opposed arguments, his cloth and one of those howling drunks in which the reverent gentleman is, to quote from his own favorite language, the Latin facile princeps, united to secure leniency from the police, and instead of being thrown in a cell like a common malefactor, he was sent home in a hack. One day, Father trod the primrose path of dalliance on 11th Street, and the next day he resumed his pious occupation of teaching sinners the steep and thorny path to heaven. In the meantime, however, he had to plead hard with the police to keep him off the steep and rocky road to the workhouse via the Black Maria. The case was one for a husband and a horsewhip rather than for a policeman and a station house. The matter was kept out of the newspaper. I suppressed it in the Globe Democrat because I gave the Reverend accused benefit of the doubt as to the extent to which his condition rendered him irresponsible for his conduct. He is not merciful to me as I have been and yet am to him. For I still cover the mantle of his booze, his sin of the flesh, while he arraigns me under a distinct charge of having received money for the silence of this newspaper on a certain occasion. Of course, he lies and knows he lies. And he knows, too, that the apostle, he is very fond of quoting the apostle, condemns lying as almost as bad as insulting a virtuous woman on the street. Further than this, I cannot go in defense of myself against anything said by a deadbeat of the Falun stripe, except to remark incidentally that if hell were dosed with tartar emetic, the last dreg of the last vomit would be a Falun in full canticles. Mac, J.B. McClellan. Wow. I don't think he liked him very well. Ortes A. Brownson, who joined the Catholic Church when Hecker and others submitted to the Roman yoke, established a quarterly review for the purpose of exposing and defending Romanist teachings. An American, Brownson, used an American freedom of speech and soon incurred the hostility of the church authorities. He had, mark you, sacrificed everything on going over to Rome, but Rome had no mercy for her convert. It drove him to poverty and even misery. To Brownson, poor and even hungry, Rome refused bread. Now she is building monuments to his memory, obtaining money even from Protestants for the purpose. Neglecting him living, they traffic on him dead. No charity and truth in the creed of the Roman Catholic Church. We are sometimes told of the munificence of the monasteries of old. Of this, Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations states, over and above the rents of those estates, the clergy possessed in the tithes a very large portion of the rents of all the other estates in every kingdom of Europe. The revenues arising from both those species of rents were, the greater part of them, paid in kind, in corn, wine, cattle, poultry, etc. The quantity exceeded greatly what the clergy could themselves consume, and there were neither arts nor manufactures for the produce of which they could exchange the surplus. The clergy could derive advantage from this immense surplus in no other way than by employing it, as the great barons employed the like surplus of their revenues in the most profuse hospitality and charity. The hospitality and charity of the clergy not only gave them command of a great temporal force, but increased very much the weight of their spiritual weapons. Those virtues procured them the highest respect and veneration among all the inferior ranks of people, of whom many were constantly and almost all occasionally fed by them. The monks, in other words, so oppressed the people by heavy levies upon their produce that the tillers of the soil, after being robbed of the result of their labor, were driven to the robbers to beg food enough to prevent starvation from a supply that must otherwise have gone to waste. The monks multiplied their adherents because the people were thus made dependent. Nothing was there in their conduct which evinced a single element of the principle of law or of charity, but on the contrary, they established by oppressive taxation the relation of slavery and despotism or tyranny. That is awful. So they grew the stuff, then they took the stuff, and then the people that grew the stuff had to go beg for it. That's crazy. What was true of the monks and nuns of the Middle Ages is true today. Ortes A. Brownson sought to defend the monastic greed of his time half a century ago, but because he could not consciously do it as papalism desired, he was suffered, genius that he was, to die a pauper. Henry de Holtz, a gifted and amiable French writer, was, under the pontificate of Leo XIII, editor of Le Journal de Rome, a daily French paper considered generally as an official organ of the Vatican. M. des Holtz is in close touch constantly with Vatican authorities, wrote under Vaticanistic inspiration, happening on one occasion to write under that very inspiration an article which gave offense to a leading government of Europe. M.D. Hoax was called upon by the selfsame authority which had inspired it to disavow the article. Hesitating or refusing to do as commanded by the Vatican, his paper was condemned and its editor reduced to penury. Woe betide the Catholic editor who does not write as bishop, the Pope's agent commands. Let's see, I think I read that completely kind of wrong. Woe betide the Catholic editor who does not write as bishop, the Pope's agent commands. What the Pope is in the Church Universal, the bishop is in his own diocese. The Pope is their spiritual king, and what they call their church, that is, their bishops all over the world, is, one may say, their spiritual parliament. Now, as this parliament of bishops from all parts of the world cannot meet without great difficulty, and as no one but the Pope can call it together, it is the Pope alone who in reality holds supreme authority over his spiritual subjects, the Roman Catholics. The way in which the Pope governs his church all over the world is this. He publishes a kind of proclamation, which they call a bull, and sends it round to all places where there are Roman Catholics. As every bishop by himself is a subject of the Pope, who calls himself the Bishop of Bishops, the bull must be obeyed by them. Every bishop commands all his priests to see that the orders of the Pope be obeyed by all those who are under their charge. The priests preach the necessity of complying with the orders of the Pope, and when people come to get absolution for their sins by privately confessing them, they are told that they cannot be forgiven unless they obey the bull from Rome. So you see that if all the world were true Roman Catholics, the Pope would do what he pleases everywhere. Such, in fact, was the case for many centuries before the Reformation. The popes in those times boldly declared that they had authority from God to depose kings from their thrones, and many a fierce war has been made in consequence of the ambitions of the popes, who wished all Christian kings to recognize their authority. King John of England was obliged by the Pope to lay his crown at the feet of a priest who was sent to represent him. That king was, moreover, made to sign a public deed by which he surrendered the kingdoms of England and Ireland to the Pope, reserving to him the government of the realms under the control of the bishops of Rome. And finally, as a mark of subjection, bound himself to pay an annual tribute. The priest who represented the Pope took away the crown and kept it 5 days from the king to show that it was in the Pope's power to give it back or not as he pleased. Wow. So writes Dr. Blanco White, at one time chaplain of the King of Spain and afterwards clergyman of the Church of England. The Reverend Father Lambert, one of the ablest clergymen that the Church of Rome has ever had in America, incurred the displeasure of Bishop Barney McQuad of Rochester, New York. McQuad, a foundling as far as his origin is known, possibly the bastard son of a priest, advanced himself to distinction till he finally became Bishop of Rochester. No more despotic man ever filled an episcopal see. He fell angrily upon Lambert, not because Lambert had written aught against the truth, but because, jealous of Lambert's success as a defender of Christianity against Robert G. Ingersoll, he, McQuad, desired to rob Lambert's contributions to the press of their proper weight and authority. Michael Augustine Corrigan, son of a Jersey saloon keeper, and himself very inferior in talent and acquirement, became, by one of the accidents peculiar to the Romanish system, Archbishop of New York. Safely enthroned in the American metropolis, he fell upon Dr. McGlynn, who had written on the taxation problem favorably to the working and toiling classes generally. Corrigan had not brains enough himself to tell what a Christian ought to believe concerning taxation. but having a personal grudge against McGlynn, decided to destroy the latter on the ground that McGlynn advocated anti-Catholic doctrine in retaxation and almost home rule for Ireland. By the papal bull, McGlynn was suspended and even excommunicated. But Leo XIII, astute politician and opportunist, realizing after several years that Corrigan was unable to crush McGlynn, restored to him all faculties and prerogatives. Patrick Boyle, editor of the Irish Canadian of Toronto, Canada, was a noble son of Erin. In days that were dark for Irishmen in Canada, he was a gallant defender. A Catholic, he submitted, of course, to all reasonable demands of the Church. The Catholic separate parochial school system of Toronto, controlled by Archbishop John Joseph Lynch, became in time a reproach and a scandal to all citizens. There was a separate school board, carefully selected at St. Michael's Palace, Lynch's residence, whose main duty it was to manipulate the school taxes of Catholics to the benefit of Lynch. The separate schools falling into neglect and backwardness, Boyle felt, like other Irish Catholics, that inquiry should be made into the causes of failure. Slight investigation disclosed the source of the trouble. The Archbishop stole from the church funds what was of right belonging to the Catholic children of Toronto. Boyle exposed the outrage. He became at once the object of archiepiscopal fury. He and his paper were vigorously denounced. Lynch set up a new paper, the Tribune, to destroy the Irish Canadian, which had been for so many years his devoted organ. But the Tribune did not receive the popular support that Lynch desired. It failed, and Lynch submitted gracefully to grievous loss. Gracefully, because while his own paper suffered, he had the satisfaction of driving Patrick Boyle out of business and into poverty. W.H. Nigel of Ottawa, back in the 70s, started a Catholic paper called the Herald for the special purpose of defending the Catholic cause. Nagel was able, far-seeing, and disinterested. He was, however, an Irish Catholic, an unforgivable sin to J.T. Duhamel, the ignorant little French-Canadian bishop of Ottawa at the time. The latter bought, on a certain visit to Rome, a sack of bones said to have been the remains of St. Emilius, supposed to be Christian martyr of the reign of Diocletian. Bringing back to Ottawa these bones, which might have been those of a dog or cat deceased but 10 years or less, Duhamel offended all sensible people, Catholics as well as others, by insinuating a special devotion to St. Emilius and placing his remains under a particular altar located predominantly in the Cathedral of Ottawa. Nagel objected to the whole proceeding. Emilius had, according to Duhamel's own story, died in the 4th century. How, asked Nagel, had his bones been so long preserved? Then I don't know what that was supposed to be, but it preserved, F, quote, quote, again, asked Nigel, why should Catholics depend for salvation on mere bones when the word of God was at their command? Too much was this for the little ignorant French bishop to stand. He condemned the Herald and put it out of business. Nagel afterwards died in want. L'Électeur, a French liberal paper of Quebec, incurred in 1896 the hostility of the hierarchy of that province. It opposed Romanist separate schools in Manitoba. Put out of business at great loss to its owners and publishers. It reappeared under a new name, Le Soleil, and had then to walk the plank of ultramontanism, very cautiously indeed. Another French paper published in Montreal was driven to ruin because it had the audacity to condemn a French priest, Guillot, guilty of seducing through the confessional the wife of a prominent French-Canadian lawyer. Such cases as that of Guillot occurred every day. Guillot was discovered because of full, obscene letters written by him to the woman he had wronged. These letters, discovered accidentally by the outraged husband, led to public exposure of the infamy. So excited was all Canada over the Guillot infamy that the bishops of Quebec were forced to issue a pastoral letter explaining it away. No such thing is there as freedom of the press for Catholic reader or editorial writer. Leading Catholic papers have had for editors notorious drunkards, such, for instance, as Reverend Thomas E. Judge, DDLLD, Dr. Judge, of the New World. Chicago ex-professor of philosophy in Maynooth Seminary, Ireland, whose whole record in America was one scarlet mark of infamy, from New York via St. Paul to Chicago, and rivaled his exploits of infamy in Ireland, England, and Rome itself. The Reverend Thomas F. Cashman, rector St. Jarlath's Parish, Chicago, writes of priest editor Judge in part as follows. This man Judge came into the Archdiocese of Chicago under the darkest kind of ecclesiastical cloud. He is a man of considerable intellectual ability, but he is a moral pygmy. I'm sorry, forgive me. His normal state is to be under the influence of drink and being a constant transgressor against ecclesiastical codes and proprieties. He is the veriest sycophant and defending with his pen and eulogizing with his tongue Muldoon and the present regime. He, Judge, is, as I said before, a sacerdote vagabundus, tramp priest. In the fall of 1902, the writer, together with the priest listed on page 54 of my book, Romanism, A Menace to the Nations, had printed and forwarded by registered mail to the Pope and Cardinals a book of 198 pages containing an expose of the crimes of priests, prelates, and princes of the Church. From said expose, page 40, I quote the following and read Priest Judge. Shh, no. You, Archbishop of Chicago, about a year ago appointed Reverend T.E. Judge to a city parish. Well, you knew that he was a periodical drunkard, a sacerdote vagabondus, in the fullest and completest sense of that expression. Soon after, Archbishop Quigley of Chicago appointed Priest Judge editor-in-chief of the New World, the papal organ of Chicago, and soon again thereafter, Sacerdotus Vagabondus was created a D.D., Doctor of Divinity, by Pope Pius X as a reward for his diabolical and treasonable writings against free institutions at home and abroad. Dr. Cronin of Buffalo, New York, able and brilliant, incurring the dislike of misfit bishops like McQuad of Rochester, Quigley of Buffalo, later of Chicago, and others, fell too by the wayside. The press and the Roman Church can never work in harmony unless press subject itself absolutely and entirely to papalism. Romanism has not, since Pius IV, undergone the slightest change. It was that Pope who declared, the books of arch heretics, as well as those who invented or excited heresies after the year above mentioned, as of those who are or were the heads or leaders of heretics, such as Luther, Zungilius, Calvin, Balthazar, Passamontius, Swint, I don't know these people, I'm sorry, Swinch, Phidias, and such like, of what name, title, or argument soever, are utterly prohibited. And the books of other heretics, such as professedly treat of religion, are altogether condemned. But such as do not treat of religion are permitted, after having been examined and approved by Catholic theologian, by order of the bishop and inquisitors. But Catholic books written as well by those who are, But Catholic books written as well by those who, after falling, have returned to the bosom of the Church, being approved by the theological faculty of some Catholic university or by a general inquisition, may be permitted. Catholic books only approved by a general inquisition or some Catholic university may be read. The Catholic paper in America is a mere apologist for papal misdeeds. We have one in Cincinnati in close alliance with the liquor traffic. As Lickner, traffic, as the cuts on pages 334, 339, and 341 will show. Catholic papers in other cities stand out just as prominently, for Rome and Romanism. The bishop owns the paper or owns editor and publisher. No freedom whatever permitted in editorial page or any other. The Catholic paper, blessed by Pope and authorized by Bishop, is simply an apologist and supporter of Romanist white slavery, a slave-licking hand of slave owner. Appended is a typical wail of the Romanist press on the subject of divorce. Charity should, however, even with Romanist press agents, begin at home. Why does not the Catholic Telegraph begin by asking for the abandonment of divorce granting or annulling of the matrimonial tie by Archbishop Moeller, clerical matrimonial tribunal, which, in defiance of the state laws, severs the lawful marriage bonds, a person seeking its good offices secretly, but with plentiful cash supply for the necessary dispensation, etc. Matrimonial causes, in quotes, yield to Romanish exchanger tributes most bounteous, and the Romanist agents knows well, taught as he is on the Ligurian plans of fraud and filthiness, how to work the game. There is little or no respect for marriage in Latin Europe or in Latin America. Thousands of people live in the latter region in adulterous relations, continued for years, even for a lifetime, without slightest thought of a marriage ceremony. The priests themselves live in open concubinage. Marital infidelity is extremely common in France, whose civilization is product of centuries of papal training as well as priestly domination. A like statement is in order concerning Spain. Moral rottenness everywhere Romanism prevails is the sickening evidence of contemporaneous history. Divorce evil denounced by Senator Ransdell of Louisiana, Catholic Press Association, Washington, April 9th. United States Senator Ransdell of Louisiana, who is a practical Catholic and a Knight of Columbus, we know about them, in a lecture delivered on April 2nd before the Law Club of the Catholic University denounced divorce. At the last census period, the divorce rate was higher with us than in any other foreign country except Japan, there being 73 divorces for every 100,000 souls in the United States and 215 in Japan. The next highest was Switzerland with 32. I don't even know what it is today. And Saxony with 29. Austria permits divorce to its non-Catholic citizens and denies it to the Catholics. Its ratio was 1 as compared with our 73. The Island of Saints, Old Ireland, granted only 1 divorce per 100,000 in 5 years of the last period. Italy had none, as divorce with permission to remarry is prohibited there, though separation is permitted. Absolute divorce is also prohibited in Spain, Portugal, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Cuba. Divorce is growing rapidly in the United States. In the 23 year from 1887 to 1906, the number of marriages dissolved was 945,625, while from 1867 to 1886, it was 328,716, or a little more than 1/3. Discussing these figures of 1886, Mr. Carroll D. Wright, an eminent non-Catholic official, said, however great and growing be the number of divorces in the United States, it is an incontestable fact that it would be still greater were it not for the widespread influence of the Catholic Church. In 1887, there were 483,069 marriages and 27,919 divorces, a little more than 1 divorce for every 17 marriages. In 1906, marriages numbered 853,290 and divorces 72,069, or 1 divorce in every 12 marriages. This is a fearful rate of increase. If it continues in like proportion for the next 40 years, the middle of the present century will see 1 marriage out of every 5 dissolved by divorce. And you got it. They don't even marry anymore. Senator Ransdale stated that he had never taken a divorce case and never intended to do so. He continued, every lawyer in the country should refuse to take divorce cases and do all in his power to have divorce laws repealed. If a large percentage of lawyers of America were to frown upon divorce, oppose it in every honorable way, and refuse to represent litigants seeking divorce, the evil would rapidly decrease. The Catholic Telegraph, April 10th, 1913. Senator Ransdale is, I presume, an honest man. Jesuitory keeps him in the dark as to his church's filthy connection with adultery, legalized and lawless, with divorce used freely to gathering gold to a ravenous treasure box. So he agrees with Senator Ransdale, which I agree with him too myself, because I believe the Bible does, but I'll keep my thoughts to myself. Let's see. The Cincinnati Romanist Divorce Court is thus made up. See the Official Catholic Directory, 1913, page 73. Ecclesiastical Court for Matrimonial Causes, Reverend George X. Schmidt, Defensor Matrimony, Reverend J.T. Gallagher, Secretary. No decree of this or any other such court is valid until and unless approved by the Archbishop or bishop, no decree ever granted till paid for. Take again the Diocese of Rockford, 111, presided over Pete Mullidoon of unhappy fame. There, see the Official Catholic Directory, 1913, page 664, we find Cura for Matrimonial Causes, Judex appointed in each case, Reverend D.J. McCaffrey, Defensor Matrimony, Reverend J.J. Flanagan, Secretary. Reverend D.J. McAfee, defendant of the matrimonial tie, has a most unsavory record. For years, he had been a habitual drunkard and has very frequently been locked up in a Chicago police station, escaping trial on every occasion, as do the vast majority of priests caught in similar delinquencies all over the county. McCaffrey is now pastor of the Sacred Heart Church, Marengo 111. Notwithstanding his stupendously shameful record of lechery, drunkenness, saloon escapades, and other such like achievements, to the contrary, notwithstanding, Bishop Muldoon deems him just the man to take care for souls of Marengo 111 and defend the sacredness of the matrimonial tie in the Diocese of Rockford. Immediately preceding his promotion by his chum, Muldoon, McCaffrey spent most of his time in a saloon at the corner of 12th and O'Neill Streets, Chicago. Similar conditions might be disclosed by an examination of Romanist divorce mills through the country. At the marriage ceremony of Miss Louise Warfield to Count Ledogowski of Poland, nephew of the late Cardinal Ledogowski, celebrated at Baltimore, May 8, 1913. Cardinal Gibbons said, according to the Cincinnati Enquirer, the marriage contract is the most solemn and most sacred of all other contracts. Other contracts may be dissolved. Other treaties may be violated. The marriage contract cannot be violated, cannot be annulled. It can terminate only at death. Nay, Sir Cardinal, and is it so? Do you yourself believe that this is the correct Romanist teaching and practice? Why, Sir Cardinal, looking at Kidney's Catholic Directory for 1913, I find, page 17, the following, supplied from your own cardinal offices. Cura, Court for Matrimonial Causes, Reverend C.F. Thompson, D.D., Judge, Reverend P.A. Uriquick, S.S.D.D., Defensor Matrimony, Defender of the Marriage Tie. Let's see where we at. Reverend P.C. Gavon, STL Secretary. You have therefore, Sir Cardinal, in your own city and Diocese of Baltimore, a divorce court always ready for action, ready for pay, to annul any marriage that you may desire to have annulled. This divorce court of yours is not a mere ornamental institution. It is a big revenue producer for your works of piety. It is a graft maker par excellence. Let any Bonnie D. Castellan with well-filled purse come to foot of your princely apostolic throne seeking annulment of lawful marriage. And you, Sir Cardinal, with one eye fixed on golden treasure and the other upraised to heaven, will soon lift holy hand to untie the bond attaching the aforesaid Bonnie and any such to an heretical spouse, or even to a Catholic wife without equal share of filthy lucre to maintain her rights in your venial court of divorce. The Roman divorce system is so cunningly devised and so guiltily worked as to invite Catholics married to Protestants to put up money enough to secure a divorce decree. These courts are inducement to rich Protestant men to join Rome in order to get rid religiously of wife, whether she is a Protestant or Catholic. The most diabolical, I did something, okay. The most diabolical of all the infamous divorce machineries afflicting humanity is the divorce system of Rome. It is false, greedy, unscrupulous, and deadly, and no man better knows it so to be than James Cardinal Gibbons. Scarcely a day of the year, but Rome annuls lawful marriages and annuls them for pay. Wow, they're just guilty. All right, brothers and sisters, that ends that reading. So keep your eyes on Jesus. Next time we'll pick up in number 7, the indulgence, hucksters and other grafters of papalism and Jesuitry still busy. So keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your heart, my heart, so we will not sin against God or be deceived. I love you all so very much. Bye-bye.